Does it say you're going live?
Yep.
I'll see it on my page. Let's see.
I think it's happening, so.
You think it is? Oh, yeah. Okay. It definitely looks like it's happening. Let me see.
All right. We're ready, right? Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is our Facebook Live first look at the governor's budget. Thanks for joining us. We're going to just give a little bit about the budget in terms of what we see now, what is in this budget that was dropped last night. If you have questions, please put those in the comments, and we'll try to address those as best as we can. It's a big document that dropped not that many hours ago, and lots of folks across the Commonwealth are trying to understand what's in it, what it means for our communities, for our state, for our economy, and so forth. So the goal of this is to kind of provide some information to hopefully help tease out what's in it, and I'm sure more will come clear in the days ahead. A reminder that this is sort of the first step in the process. The governor proposes a budget to the General Assembly. It's his ideas of priorities and where resources are going to come from. And then, of course, it's the General Assembly that actually enacts the budget, and they'll have to do that by April 15th. So this is very much the beginning of a really important process for the Commonwealth. But as the duly elected governor, the budget has importance. It lays out markers. It lays out priorities that then the General Assembly will have to respond to. And I think the governor laid out some pretty strong and clear priorities last night that will help shape the conversation as we move forward through this process. We did a quick analysis of the governor's budget. It's on our website, kypolicy.org. You can take a look at that. And I think what I'll do is just give a high-level overview of what we see in the budget. And then we'll talk about any questions folks may have and wrap it up. So at the highest level, I think what the governor is doing in this budget is really stopping the cuts. We've had over a decade of budget cuts in Kentucky. We've had 20 rounds of cuts going back to 2008 with Great Recession. Those have reduced funding for many parts of government from 10 to as much as 50%. And what this budget does broadly is really try to stop those cuts, the absolute reduction in funding for many areas. And it attempts to put some new dollars into things that had been cut in the past. In some ways, in some important areas that we'll talk about, in other areas, it's sort of signaling and symbolizing, I think, a direction to go in for reinvestment. But the dollar amounts are pretty small. They're pretty modest in most ways because there's not enough revenue there, so that even in areas that are getting some reinvestment, we will still see the kind of erosion with inflation that we've seen over the last decade with these sort of funding levels. So symbolically, some of those funding improvements are important, but there's not enough money on the table here to really change the ultimate pattern that we've seen over the last decade of these kind of budget cuts. So to go through some of the areas, the budget provides $2,000 raise for teachers in the first year, as the governor had promised, and that comes out to about a 3.7% raise on average. That continues into the second year. There's not an additional raise after that. It does not provide an increase for the classified employees, but does for the teachers. The budget provides a 1% increase in what's called the Seek Per Pupil Guarantee, which is the core of the core funding formula for schools. 1% increase the first year and a 0% increase the second year. So that's a a small amount. It won't allow that formula to keep up with inflation. We will continue to see if that's where the budget ends up, the kind of erosion with inflation sort of shifting to the local level. But it is at least, again, symbolizing more money into the SEEK formula. There's some funding for particular parts of education. There's $11 million for textbooks. Textbooks in each year, textbooks were completely zeroed out in the last budget. The last budget cut preschool by 6.25%. This does not restore that cut, but does provide $5 million a year for preschool in low-income areas. And it does not increase funding for extended school services, which had also been cut by 6.25% in the last budget. So there's some areas that have been cut that don't necessarily see a restoration. Another area where we've seen erosion over time is the funding for pupil transportation, for the busing of kids. That is a state responsibility under state law, 100%, but we have seen the state cut back to where it only funds about 2/3 of those costs now and requires the districts to pick up the rest. That does not change in this budget. It remains 2/3 of the cost, only 2/3 of the cost being picked up by the state. Another important area that people talk a lot about is the school safety legislation. Senate Bill 1 that passed in the last legislative session provided for a substantial increase in funding for school safety. This budget bonds, so it borrows money to pay for these safety upgrades in school buildings that was mandated under that law. So it includes that through bonding. It does not include the monies for the other parts of the safety legislation, including counselors. So that's kind of where they are in K-12. It's some small increases in certain areas, including ones that the governor had talked about. Not all areas, and the SEEK formula increase is small and similar to what was in the last budget at 1% the first year and 0% the second. In higher education is one of the areas that has received some of the deepest budget cuts since 2008. In large part, that's because higher education has another funding source, which is to increase tuition on students. And that's been I think, part of the rationale for the kind of cuts that you've seen. This budget does not decrease the higher education funding level, which is significant, symbolically at least, to sort of stop the cuts. It does provide a 1% increase in the first year, so a little bit more money. Again, that won't keep up with inflation, and we'll continue to see this erosion in our higher ed funding once you take inflation into account. One of the important things it does do is all the higher education money does not run through what's called the performance funding model, which was created a few years ago and really makes more of the institution's funding dependent on graduation rates and other indicators. And that's been a problem because that formula was implemented at the same time that funding was being reduced to these institutions. And what we saw is that universities and community colleges that served more low-income students, more students of color, were getting little or no monies in the performance funding model. And we saw the kind of gap between richer and poorer institutions and therefore students beginning to grow under that. So it's, in our opinion, an important proposal to actually suspend that model until we can really reinvest in those institutions and then take a look at it again. So that's part of what he does. There's also more money for the college scholarships, the need-based scholarships that had been an issue in the past budgets where monies had been diverted from those programs and from the lottery dollars. It's an increase from last time. We're still not up to 100% of what's supposed to go to need-based programs, but it increases from what it was before, about 7,300 scholarships. There's other areas that get more funding. Importantly, there's 350 new social workers. This is a big issue that is, I think, fairly widely known. The Crisis in Child Protective Services, the highest rate of child abuse and neglect in the country. That's a big increase, 350 new social workers to help deal with caseloads that are twice the recommended level at this point. So that's an important piece of what is done here. It provides the funding to fully protect the Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act. It also provides the matching for the Kentucky Children's Health Insurance Program, and importantly, puts some dollars in for outreach in that program. We have actually seen an increase in the number of uninsured children in Kentucky. Even with the economy continuing to improve, we've seen an increase in the number of uninsured children, and that's been concerning. And so this provides dollars to provide additional outreach, do additional outreach to make sure that every child that's eligible for health insurance with the state gets it. There's also some money for additional slots for community-based care for individuals with disabilities. That's an important investment for that community in an area where there's long waiting lists. There's about 600 more slots provided. One part of this budget also that's important is in regard to the pension funding. And this budget provides the full actuarially required contribution to the state workers system, the Kentucky Retirement System's state worker portion. That was an increase from the last budget because of another change in the actuarial assumption. Also provides full funding for the teachers' retirement system, the actuarially required amount, as well as the amount to cover the health insurance for retired teachers. It also has a really significant proposal around the quasi-governmental organizations. The House Bill 1, which passed this summer in the special legislative session, provided a way in which these organizations could leave the system, the retirement system, and potentially freeze the pension benefits for over 6,000 current employees who are protected under the inviolable contract. This budget makes a pretty strong statement about that legislation. It actually prevents these organizations from leaving the retirement system. It keeps them in the retirement system, but holds them harmless from having to contribute more, having to pay the spike in cost that was going to result this next year. So instead of the 93% of pay they will have to contribute under the current scenario if they stayed in, the contribution rate will be only 67%, and the gap between what they pay now and that amount is being contributed by the state in this budget. So those organizations and their employees are being protected from the spike in costs, and the employees' pensions, as I mentioned, is also being protected. So that's very important. It provides a 1% raise for state employees in both years of the budget, and in 8 of the last 10 years, state employees have not had an increase. So at least symbolically, it begins to put us in the right direction on beginning to increase state workers' salaries. Important to note that, I've talked a lot about 1%. That's a number that's used a lot in this budget. Inflation over the next 2 years, according to the federal estimates, is running about 2.5%. So 1%, again, is not enough to keep up with inflation. So this is not a budget that allows us to really gain ground in that way. But again, what it does is stop the cuts, stops the freezes in this area by providing at least a little bit to begin to perhaps move us in the right direction. One of the areas that it doesn't do a lot in is in the rainy day fund. It provides only $10 million to the rainy day fund. There was about over $200 million added in the last budget. So the rainy day fund will still be under this budget proposal underfunded. I mean, it will be at about 2.6% of the revenue that we collect. 5% is the goal that we have in state law that we want to try to get to prepare for recessions. That would really be a minimum. You really want more than that. The median state last year was about 11% of their budget was in a rainy day fund. Again, we would be at 2.6%. So with the storm clouds of a possible recession out there, that is a small amount of money, but it reflects, I think, that at least in the governor's priorities, there were things he wants to not cut and put a little bit more money into, and that's how he allocated those resources as opposed to putting a lot more into the rainy day fund. And so I think that will be a debate you may see moving forward. So how is this possible? What does he do to make all this kind of work out in his budget? Well, there is a revenue plan, and we talked about, all in the lead up to this budget. If there was not more revenue put on the table, we were going to see more budget cuts. The governor did put revenue on the table. It's not a lot of revenue, but it's some. He raised about $148 million over the 2 years of the budget. And that's what really allows some of these things to happen and prevents the cuts from happening. So it's an important part of the overall plan. The specific revenue elements are an increase in cigarette tax of 10 cents. There was a 50-cent increase 2 years ago. This is just adding a dime. It puts a tax on e-cigarettes and vaping. It also increases the tax on other tobacco products, smokeless tobacco products, commensurate with the increase that's put in the cigarette tax. And then it raises what's called the limited liability entity minimum fee, which is an exciting title, I'm sure. But basically, this is a minimum business tax for corporations that are not organized as corporations but have the same kind of legal protections. That minimum fee was created back in 2006 at $175 a year and has never been increased for inflation since then. And so all this does is sort of update the fee to reflect if we'd allowed inflation to adjust it over time, as we should have. The budget also depends on revenue from legalizing sports betting, which is a separate proposal. It's in the House. So it depends on those revenues. So there is a little bit of revenue in here, and that's what helps make and prevent some deeper cuts that would otherwise be the case. As always happens, there's also one-time money that gets pulled in. Not as much one-time money as in the last budget, but you see these so-called fund transfers. The largest one is from the Petroleum Storage Tank Fund, which had been used. It's supposed to have been used to restore these old petroleum storage tanks and clean them up. It has often been used for that. So there's a lot of money that comes out of that, and they apparently issue a bond to make some of that money possible. There's other transfers as well. It does not take money from the Public Employee Health Insurance Fund, which has been a big one-time source over the last, or fund transfers over the last few budgets. It actually does not do that. And really, as we had written a couple months ago, the monies weren't there anymore to continue to sweep that fund, and so it does not do that. It does count on some other monies, including being able to enhance revenue collection by hiring more state workers into the revenue department and so forth. So it depends on some of those monies to make all this happen. So that's kind of at a high level what we're looking at here. Again, this is a budget that stops the cuts, stops the absolute reductions and the 20 rounds of budget cuts we've had. It provides some additional monies in some areas that certainly need them, but with only a couple of exceptions, doesn't provide large enough amounts of money to where you're seeing a true reinvestment that we will need at some point. We will need to find the revenue to make possible to really make up the ground that we've lost over the last dozen years, and that we will need to really strengthen these core services. That's kind of how we see things as the budget. As we look more into the nooks and crannies of this budget in the next few days, we will certainly put out more information as we find things that are important to Kentucky. We'll share that as well. We also will produce analysis of the House budget, the Senate budget, and then the final budget as it comes together. So we will put that information up on our website and make that available. But that's an overview. If folks have any questions, please just put them in the comment box. Let us know. We'll be glad to try to answer those. We'll go from there. I have our communications director, Anna Bowman, here. Do you have any questions or things that you're hearing that folks may want to learn more about?
One thing I know that a lot of people are thinking about is, well, we need new revenue to make this budget less bad than the last budget was. What are the kind of revenue proposals that are out there that would actually make us worse off?
So the question was about other revenue proposals that are out there. There aren't a lot yet, and we'll see if more emerge in this General Assembly. We've had tax credits passed and tax breaks passed in the past couple of legislative sessions that have really hurt the revenue stream, and are part of the reason we're in yet another tight budget, even though we're very far into an economic recovery and with an unemployment rate of just a little over 4%. It's concerning, and in the last couple sessions, we've had tax bills that are introduced and passed in a single day without a fiscal note, without a committee hearing. There's concerns. There have been a number of tax credits filed already this session. There's always groups that are lobbying for tax credits. Any tax credits would certainly make this budget much harder. One of the tax credits that's been pushed that we put a new report out about today is the private school tax credit. There are proposals in both the House and the Senate. That bill would cost $25 million at first, but then would escalate every year thereafter, and with no cap. And so over time, that could significantly harm the revenue stream and take hundreds of millions and even more in state funds away. So that's the kind of thing that we're going to have to really guard against. In addition to pushing for more revenue, I think what the governor proposed is some good small initial ideas. I think to have a real reinvestment budget, we're going to need more revenue ideas, but we're also going to need to guard against revenue reductions or things that might reduce the revenue stream. All right, so I think we will wrap up there. Appreciate you all joining in us today. We will hopefully do more of these as we move through the process. Email us or provide us comments if you have questions or information that you're looking for that we can help with. And we look forward to those of you who are joining our conference on Friday. We look forward to seeing you. And otherwise, we will see you throughout the legislative session. Thanks.